Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Brown from the Beyond Clean team, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this collaborative webinar between Beyond Clean and Censis Technologies. If you haven't joined us for a Beyond Clean virtual event, I'd like to call your attention to a couple of event features. On your screen, you'll find a list of resources for today's webinar that Censis has put together for you. You will also find a question and answer tool on the lower left-hand side of your screen. As the speaker is presenting today, any questions that come up for you regarding leadership, regarding resilience, regarding training, feel free to enter those questions in the question and answer box on the lower left-hand side of your screen. Gratitude and feeling thankful for what we have, despite the hardship that we might be going through, is not a new thought. However, this year, 2020, maybe more than any other year in the last decade, has shown us just how important it is to remain grateful for the big things. Even more importantly, be grateful for the small things. A sense of gratitude is a key behavior in building your resilience, and resilience is the theme for this month's Censis True Grit, True You webinars. It gives you perspective. Resilience gives you perspective. You start to understand that the trauma is not all-consuming or pervasive. It's not going to last forever, permanence, and you're not personally responsible for causing it. That's personalization. If you don't get this perspective, you can so easily be pulled into one of those 3 Ps that will stunt your resilience journey. So start that journey with us today. I am so excited for today's presentation. The most successful leaders optimize performance by establishing trust and motivating employees to contribute their best. In this unparalleled time of disruption, building resilient teams is crucial. And Lieutenant General Keith Huber, who served 38 years on active duty in the U.S. Army as an infantryman and Green Beret, is going to talk with us today about the key skills that effective leaders need to understand and model to maximize the performance of employees, to deliver on organizational goals and strategies, and ultimately to improve bottom line results. So it is with great pleasure that I turn it over to General Huber.
Thank you, Ms. Lindsay. And for those who are present, I appreciate the fact that I'm stealing time away from you this morning, something that I'll never be able to return to you. And my task, my goal, my sole objective is to share with you some thoughts that in fact will be worthy of your time and your attention. I applaud the fact that you're present here and the fact that the organizations recognize what I consider to be a pretty obvious fact, and that is leaders from my foxhole are not born, leaders are developed, and leadership matters. And any organization will be a direct reflection of the quality of the character and the approach of the leader. So I don't think I've ever had an original thought. I'm convinced that what I did was I learned something from everyone that I had the privilege to interact with, that I borrowed and stole and copied and modified techniques that I saw. And sometimes it's amusing to me, either in the academic environment or in a series like this where you get a continuing education credit. You check the block for leadership training and leadership development that to me, we're always in a classroom. Life is a classroom. We're always under observation. There's always an exam. And we all know in our hearts what leadership is. We all have our expectations of how a leader should present themselves, should look, should act, should speak, should dress. I part my hair down the center. I wonder what image you had in your mind if you knew that you were going to suffer through a short period this morning, which may seem infinitely ending to you, to share ideas with me. But what were your expectations of what a 3-star Green Beret would be. And now very quickly you've graded me and you've decided if you're going to tune me in or tune me off, or if I'm worthy of your time. So leadership is something that we share and needs to be developed. Let me talk. What I intend to share is what I think I've learned during my entire adult life of building and leading teams, from a 12-man Green Beret operational aid attachment to an organization of tens of thousands of people. On my last 2 years on active duty, I spent in Afghanistan in command of a critter they called the Combined Joint Interagency Task Force. Well, what's that mean? That means I had military from other nations. I had military from the United States Armed Forces. I had participants from every organization within the U.S. government. I had contractors. And so how do you take an organization of that diversity and that size and lead it? I'm going to say a couple things for you to reflect upon, but please don't misunderstand me. I would never be so obnoxious or arrogant to go, here it is, here's the solution, here's what you should do. I would just share with you for your internal reflection of what techniques or procedures or comments or observations you then feel you can adapt to your circumstance. And so let me start right away and irritate the business world and say that I oppose the concept of a best practice. So why do I say that? Now that you've recovered from the shock and you've decided that I'm not worthy of your time and that I don't understand, to me, a best practice implies that, gee, if you want to be good, do it this way. If you take this pill, if you drink this elixir, if you follow these steps, if you fill in this checklist, regardless of day or night, rain or snow, sleet or hail, desert or jungle, if you do this, you're going to be successful. And most often it then gives you the reverse effect of, gee, Huber, the reason you weren't successful is you didn't pay attention to the best practice. I think the concept is intellectually inaccurate. And I'm not trying to be glib with Webster, but what I think is more relevant, and to me, leadership concepts, much like academic concepts writ large, you know, it's great to understand the concept, but then the trick is, how do I apply it? How do I take this idea and fit it into my circumstance and become more effective, more productive? So to me, I believe in a promising practice, because I think a best practice could lead you down the path of, it avoids the context, it avoids the circumstance, it involves the situation that you're in. And so to me, a promising practice is you go in all candor and brevity, you go, okay, here's the problem I was trying to solve. Here's the circumstance I faced. Here's the question I was trying to answer. And you insert into there the reality of the context and the environment. And you go, here's what I thought I wanted to do. Here's what I tried. Here's how that critter worked out. Because we all face different circumstances. And to think at the end of the day, if you're disciplined enough to reflect upon, okay, boy, I survived today. What did I think I was going to do today when I got up? What did I want to accomplish today? What did I accomplish? Was I successful? If so, why? If not, why? and then, gee, I'm going to try and do better tomorrow, but without the assumption that, gee, if I was successful today, I'll be successful tomorrow doing the same thing, because the world has changed. The circumstance has changed. And so we talk about resilience. I mean, if you look at Webster will identify resilience as the ability to recover, to readjust, given adversity or disappointment or bad stuff happening to you, to return back to normal. And I disagree with that. I think the concept of resilience is much more than your ability to recover. I think the benefit of resilience is it identifies the reality, and a leader must do due diligence. And you got to do an assessment of the reality. You know, reality is what it is. It's not what we want it to be. And it always amazes me that people, especially under stress, people faced with unfavorable circumstances, dream up this alternate universe of a reality. And I see it in combat all the time, with bombs going off and bullets flying and smoke and screams and injured and wounded and people trying to kill you. And I see people just go, wow, this can't be happening to me. They just freeze in the moment because they don't want to accept the horror of what they're facing, that they want to magically transport themselves someplace else. Now, I see it with our current pandemic, is so many people want to go, gee, I don't believe it, or it won't happen to me, or this isn't fair, or this isn't possible. And just count, yesterday, 1,100 people died based upon the virus. So does it require that it touches you personally for you to be able to understand the reality that our world changes every day? And for us to be resilient is that we analyze that and we respond to it and we change what we're doing. So I believe in a promising practice. I think the world is a giant classroom. I think we're always being tested, and we can always learn from people that we had the privilege to interact with, and we all walk away from interactions. You'll walk away from this interaction maybe not remembering much of what I said, but you will remember how you feel. You will remember if you feel that this was worthy of your attention or your time. Your expectation is that I'm going to present something to you that you can reflect upon and use. So as I looked at my 6 C's, which I haven't written a book, I'm not going to write a book. The 6 C's are my simplistic way to identify thoughts that I think are worthy of your consideration as you seek to improve your leadership and your team effort. But as I look at the 6 core values of what was identified as true grit, we have a similar, and it's courage. So I'm going to take courage and resiliency and weave that into the other C's that I'm going to present for your consideration. So do you have the courage to take the time to assess what's going on, to really think about what's the question we're trying to answer, what's the problem we're trying to solve, what are the circumstances we're in, and how do we adjust? You know, some people would say Darwin's concept was survival of the fittest. I think that's partially true. I think Darwin's concept was also those who adapt survive. And so this ability to change, which most people are uncomfortable with change. Most people feel change is an unnatural act, and leaders have got to lead that change. So let's go to our first C. So my wife had open heart surgery. And most people, when I say that, they're very kind and compassionate, and they go, gee, I'm sorry. I say, okay, thank you. But let me give you a different perspective. My dad died 16 years ago. I was deployed. My son was diagnosed with cancer and went through chemotherapy. I was deployed. My mother died 8 years ago. I was in Afghanistan. My son lost one of his 4 sons. I was deployed. So to me, having spent my entire adult life protecting the families of the world, often at the expense of my own, and having borne the responsibility of making decisions and asking people to do things in combat that directly led to their deaths. To me, the opportunity to be home, to have a home, and to actually be home with my family during the normal challenges of the cycle of life is a blessing. It's not a curse. And so the perspective that we heard Miss Lindsay talk about being thankful, is truly there. Nobody wants a boss that they feel can't relate to them. Nobody wants to go through that mental process and go, gee, there is no way that you understand what I'm going through. You know, when I got out of the military, my wife bought a home in Franklin, Tennessee. And then recently we moved here to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And when we moved the house, why, her parents decided to come up from Florida and visit us, which was great. And while she was here, while her parents were in our home, why, her mother's battle with breast cancer grabbed a hold of her. And so thankfully, the home that we had here in Murfreesboro was set up in such a fashion that a live hospice could come in and set up a hospital room, and her mom and dad could have their privacy. And for 3 months, they lived with us until her mom died. And to me, I was so thankful for that, because I didn't want my wife to bear the guilt of being absent, being apart from her brothers and sisters when one of her parents died. And as difficult as it was to watch her dad go through watching his wife for 58 years die a little bit each day, as hard as that was, at least they knew they were in an environment safely and surrounded by love. And so I believe stuff happens for a reason. I don't believe in coincidence. So how do you walk into an organization that they're accustomed to being together? And how do you establish a basis of commonality? How do you convince people that you're a human being? How do you convince them that you're not aloof, that you don't think you're superior, that you need to convince them that you care more about them than yourself, that you're not there using their hard work and their initiative and their energy as a springboard for your own self-promotion? How do you do that? I mean, that starts to develop this critical fiber of trust. And a technique, though it's a painful technique, is to reflect and share part of your soul, part of your humanity. Because the commonality, regardless of the organization, regardless of the age, regardless of the size, regardless of the diversity, we all have a common human dimension. We all have people who love us and worry about us. We're all sons and daughters and mothers and fathers and grandparents and brothers and sisters. So are you willing? Do you have the courage as the leader to share part of yourself, to interact with people? More than simply, this is the job and here's my assessment and boy, you're doing a lousy job. Do you have the courage to take the time to get to know people and to share part of yourself, however painful those memories are, but to show that when it's all done, we're all human beings. I mean, if you knew today was your last day, if you knew that tomorrow you would die, what would you change? What would you do today? Who would you call? Who would you write? Who would you go visit? Who would you say, forgive me? Who would you forgive? Who would you say, I love you? And as you go through that serious self-reflection of the quality of your character, of what you want written on your headstone, if all of a sudden now you find yourself making major adjustments, then you should take that to heart. You should think about that. Because today could be your last day. And you just don't know it. And in the military, there were lots of times. You know, I had open heart surgery. I was with Charlie Daniels for a charity event with our veterans, and I had a heart attack, and I said, gee, I need to leave. Fortunately, it was during the cocktail hour, so I didn't have to get up in the middle of a speech. And then I told Charlie and Hazel Daniels that, you know, I just got sick. I got cold sweats. I think I'm going to pass out. And so we were in Nashville at the restaurant The Palm. And so Shelley goes, well, we'll drive you to Vanderbilt. I said, no, we need to go back to our house in Franklin because our daughter at the time was 11 and she had a new babysitter. And I didn't want the babysitter to go through the trauma of, gee, I'm never going to babysit this kid again because something awful. So Shelley, we drove back to Franklin, and I'm hoping that I'm going to feel better. She takes the babysitter home. I get sick 2 more times. She comes back. I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. So we take our daughter across the street to a neighbor. By now it's 11:30 at night. We're driving to Vanderbilt and Nashville. And I call the wonderful director of the VA hospital in Middle Tennessee, Navy nurse, Navy 06, retired Jenny Vadro-Barron. And she immediately picks up, and I said, I'm having a heart attack. I'm going to Nashville. I'm not going to the VA hospital. I'm going to Vanderbilt. Could you transfer my records? So for those of you who have been to Vanderbilt Hospital, it's like most hospitals, you know, you get there and there's never a parking spot. and Shelley wants to drop me off at the ER. And I go, it's almost midnight. You know, when we find our assigned parking slot, which undoubtedly is going to be in East of Jesus someplace, I'm not having my wife walk through empty parking lots in the middle of the night. So we get there and we park, and I get out of the car, and I lose the ability to stand. So here I am on my knees, almost midnight, in the parking lot, and I go, "Thank you, Lord, for my family and care after." And I was at peace with my feeble attempts to live my life in an honorable fashion. Well, 2 security guards were getting off shift at midnight. They saw me. They figured out I wasn't a mugger. They got a wheelchair and they wheeled me into the ER. And I described to the doctor what went on, and he goes, "You know, what you're describing sounds like a heart attack, but you're in really good physical condition. Well, we're going to put a camera, we're going to catheter through your wrist and see what we see." And, you know, they did a local. And so I knew I was in trouble when the doctor starts cursing and going, "Gee, you've got 8 blockages and you should be dead." So I went through triple bypass and my heart was fine. And I get to the ER and the intensive care, and the head nurse comes up to me and goes, "You got a bouquet of roses from Charlie Daniels, and you got a phone message from Secretary of Defense Mattis. Who are you?" I went, "I'm an old guy that you just gave a 9.5-inch scar to." But I tell people that of my other near-death experiences, I like this one the most. And they look at me like you're looking at me right now, like this guy is nuts. But I say that because I'm willing to talk about it. And the others I either can't or I won't. And not only can I talk about it, but I can talk about it to help other people, because I went through a stress test every year. And they always went, by golly, whether it was a treadmill or a chemically induced stress test, they went, "You got the heart of a 20-year-old. Well, what that stress test does is it tests the strength of the chambers of the heart. And I'm not a doctor, but it seems to me that most heart events are based upon circulation flow. And so only a calcium CT scan will tell you if you got blockages. And so all of a sudden, you know, the Secretary of Defense is telling the United States Armed Forces, I mean, I'm getting people going, "Gee, if Huber had a heart attack, I'm a walking dead man." But we were able to educate ourselves that perhaps some of the assessment tools that were being used really didn't give us the prediction that we're looking for. And there's another test that's out there. I like this near-death experience because I can talk to my wife about it, and she has a basis to relate. I mean, this ability to communicate, this ability to share life events and hardships and sacrifices is a powerful tool to reintegrate and to build trust. And so commonality has got to be the foundation. You know what you expect of your leaders, and you expect your leaders to care more about you than them, to be able to relate to them at a human dimension level, to be honest. And guess what? Everybody on this video is a leader, whether you want to be or not. Somebody looks to you every day, especially in times of stress, to figure out what the right thing to do is. Leadership is not a elected, selected, appointed, anointed possession. Leadership is a human dimension. I get people that go, "Gee, you're a general. What do you know about leadership?" You got tens of thousands of men and women that are just waiting on you to order them to do something. You don't need to lead them, you just order them. And I go, wow, yeah, you've got a different view of leadership than I do. Because in the darkest of moments, you know, I got 5.5 years of combat of people in an organized fashion on a daily basis trying to kill me. People allow you the privilege to be their leader. They willingly follow you, at times to their death, not based upon your gender, your religion, your physical size, your strength, or even in the military hierarchy, your duty position or your rank. They willingly follow you based upon a sense of mutual respect and trust that you've got to earn every bloody day. That is the essence of leadership. And we talk about moral courage. The first time that as a leader, you connect the dots, that you look the sons and daughters of America in the eye and you go, I need you to do this, and here's the risk. And sometimes you can go with them and sometimes you can't. And they look at you and they humble you and they go, got it, sir. And you know that some of them won't survive doing what you've asked them to do in defense of our nation. And you take them home and bury them and present on a bended knee a folded flag from their casket to their parents, to their wives, to their children, to their brothers and sisters, and say, on behalf of a grateful nation. Once you realize that they have died for you because you asked them, you wonder if you'll have the moral courage to do that again. Commonality, absolutely essential to convince people to develop a foundation of, hey, we're all human beings here trying to do the right thing. The role of the leader is to take a diverse group of human beings with different education, different cultures, different ages, different ways to receive information, and set the conditions so that everyone can make a contribution to a successful team effort. Your task as the leader is to view success only in the context of a team effort, not individual shooting stars. You know, there's a book, Wisdom of Crowds, and the concept is you're at that county fair, and there's that huge jar of jelly beans or gumballs, and they go, guess the correct number of gumballs in this jar, and you win a trip to a webinar with Hubert. And so out of 100 people, magically, mystically, there'll be 2 people that'll guess the exact number of gumballs in that jar. But then if you take the other 98 answers and you average them, you'll come closer to the exact number of gumballs in that jar than anybody other than the 2 who got it right. So what's that tell you? That tells you that you should not be intimidated, that you should not be discouraged. You should embrace the diversity of your team, whether it's 4 people, 400 people, 40,000 people. You should embrace the diversity and set the conditions so that everybody can make a contribution. Nobody comes to work going, gee, let me convince everybody that I'm a selfish idiot. No, everybody wants to be value added. Everybody wants their opinion to be listened to. You don't have to decide in their favor, but for goodness sakes, understand that we all in this classroom of life, in this leadership laboratory, we all can learn by listening to others. It's so important to view life as a team effort. So, commonality, share with yourself, know your people, understand them so you can look them in the eye and tell if they're under stress, because part of our task as a leader is to recognize stress and alleviate stress. Competence. So we have an expectation that all of our leaders are going to be competent. But what's that mean? It means that as you progress through an organization, the competence that you initially had at entry level isn't the competence that you should strive to have. In other words, your competence needs to be at your job level. Every organization, you know, the military is wonderful for that, because you're always the new person, it seems, regardless of how senior you are. You're there in one job for a year or two or maybe 3, and then they move you. And so you walk into a new job and you're the newbie. And especially, I mean, of my 38 years, I spent 14 as a general officer. So every place I walked into, I knew people were thinking, what idiotic ideas is this General Huber going to have? How's he going to stand us on our head? He doesn't understand what we do or who we are. He's going to come in and put his fingerprints on it and, you know, try to make it like him. No, no, no. I go around and I go to people at their location. I don't summon them up to my office and I sit behind my desk and stand them at attention. No, I go to them out of respect. I want to see where they work. I want to see how their team responds to them. And then I walk up to people and go, what are you doing? Understanding that mentally they may be thinking this, or some of them may actually say this and go, why? You don't trust me? You want to do my job? Whoa, no. I'm respectful of what you do. I want to understand what you do. I don't want to do your job. I'm trying to figure out my job. But give them the courtesy and the respect of shutting up and listening to them. Have the courage to recognize that regardless of how old you are or your experience level, there's so much more to learn, and demonstrating the common courtesy and respect to others that, please tell me what you do so I can understand it. I don't want to replace you. I don't want to criticize you, but I want to understand. So then when you ask me for resources, I can go, okay, I understand how this fits, and I understand how it contributes to the overall team success. And view your leadership competency as understanding what keeps your boss's boss awake. You should be a solution set. If you're going to protect your organization and gain resources for your organization, you have got to be the answer. You have got to be the solution. You can't talk to your boss or your boss's boss, and the only time you talk to them, you're complaining, going, oh my goodness, if I had more people, if I had more time, if I had a bigger budget. Have the courage to accept the reality, the resilience to go, gee, I don't have everything I wish I had, but let me assess what I have. Let me readjust and realign given the changed circumstances. Let me not waste my time and energy of going, gee, this isn't fair. I'm not given a fair chance. I can't do what I want. I wish I had more. Deal with it. I have never gone into an organization, and once again, I'm not using myself as a role model for anything except how to grow hair, okay? But every organization I've gone into, I've never started off going, hey, I need more of this. Even in combat, I did an assessment of what I have. I said, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we doing it? How do we know if we're successful? And then I talked to people hey, if you were me, what would you change? What would you keep? How do you think we're doing? How can we be more successful? Learn by listening to their perspective, and then have the courage as the leader to make changes and to have the courage to go, here's why we're making this changes, so that they don't think erroneously you're just flexing your muscles. I'm the boss, I can change, do what I want. But you're making changes that are focused on improving the team effort, on improving the success. People expect you to care more about the organization than yourself. People will accept changes that you explain, that you take the time to explain it, that you take the time to think aloud so that they can understand. That takes time, that takes effort. Don't get into the mode of, hey, I'm the boss, I can do whatever the hell I want to do. And if you don't like it, why, there's other jobs out there. That really boosts morale. They're going to be willing to follow you. They're going to go, hey, I'm going to come here and survive Huber and not do anything more. So we talked about commonality. We talked about competence. Let's talk about communications. How do you communicate with people? If you say, gee, I'm going to counsel you. I mean, that word in and of itself has a negative connotation, and it shouldn't. It takes time to get to know the people that you serve them. They don't serve you. That for you to lead and build an effective team, you've got to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the members of the team and then facilitate improvement. You know, people can be willing and able. Those are two different concepts. And if people are willing to change, willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to sacrifice, that's what you want. If they're able, that's great. But if they aren't able, if they aren't trained, while you can train them to be capable, to be skilled, to be able, but you're going to have a harder time training them to be willing. And so how do you communicate with people what is primarily behavior modification without the Skinner box and the electrical grid? And when I say something you don't like, you zap me. No. I mean, how do you communicate with people? And at the human dimension level, it's got to be face to face. In the current environment that we face, if you can't do that safely, why then the next best thing is this virtual interaction. But you've got to show people that you're willing to be uncomfortable and be face to face with them. And I think there's a couple really good techniques with communication. And they're simple, and you can use them in the virtual format. But you walk into the organization and you got a blank piece of paper. And you start out by doing what I refer to as the terms of reference. And you go, what do you think I do? Will you please share with me what you think I do and what you think you do? And I'll do the same. You know, I will describe to you what I think my role and responsibilities are, and I'll describe to you what I think yours are. It's a fascinating discussion because it opens the windows of how people think, and we know we have an expectation that, gee, the boss isn't going to do my job. If the boss wants to do my job, then they don't need me. And these friction points, which are logical, when there isn't a clear delineation or definition of who does what and the overlap. I mean, how many times, as you reflect, how many times have you been in an organization where you were really unclear what you did, or you knew what you did, but you were convinced that your boss didn't do anything. Or your boss was convinced you didn't do anything. I mean, you can resolve that in a private discussion of terms of reference and responsibilities. I mean, it's just like when you do performance-based evaluations. And they should be done frequently so that counseling, it shouldn't be viewed as in my office now. People are going, oh my God, you should talk to people. And once again, I start with a blank piece of paper and go, here's 2 things that you do that are really great. And here's how they positively impact the success of our overall team effort. And gee, you're doing better than anybody I know. Please don't stop it. And then here's one thing that I'd offer for your consideration for modification. And here's the impact on the success of the team. And then you go, and next week, I want you to come back and do the same for me. And you can imagine, particularly in a military organization, I mean, me telling my 1 and 2 stars, hey, I want you to critique what I do well and what I need to improve. So they come back, and here I am. I'm ready to check the moral courage block when they go, boss, here's 2 things that you do better than anyone in the universe. You're awesome. And you asked me to critique you on one thing I think you can improve in, and I haven't been able to sleep because I just can't think of anything. And you go, okay, moral courage, non-existent. And then you've got an answer for them. You go, well, I think I need to improve on this. And you're hitting the mark when all of a sudden they go, yeah, you're right. You really suck at that. You need to improve that. But this ability to open a channel of communication, to compare and contrast performances and roles and responsibility, always focused on the team success and the team performance. And of course, you as the leader, your task is to identify what success is. You got to be able to visualize it. When I commanded U.S. forces in Kosovo, I not only had U.S. forces, I had Polish, I had Greek, I had Ukraine, I had Russian, I had members of government and contractors. And my task was to define success. What does success look like? How do you paint it? How do you visualize it? Which would allow every member at all levels of your organization to go, yep, here's how I contribute to what the boss views as success. I'm not just doing busy work, or I'd walk around and ask soldiers, what are you doing? Praying that they wouldn't say, gee, I don't know why I'm doing this. Some idiotic general said to do this. But how do you define success? And my definition in Kosovo was to reduce the acts of violence. I didn't care if it was kids throwing rocks at cars, because I saw the throwing of a rock rapidly transition to the throwing of a hand grenade, to putting a bomb in a building or on a street, to shooting at somebody, to burning a place down. I didn't care if it was politically motivated or criminally motivated, because the destruction of property, the killing of people, the violence in the streets was adverse and disruptive to creating an environment which would ultimately lead to the conduct of free and fair elections. So understand, have the courage to communicate with people, have the courage to tell people things they don't want to hear, critique their duty performance. Excuse me a second. forgive me, they are determining that in spite of asking them not to do leaf removal outside my office during this, so forgive me for being disruptive. So we talked about commonality, we talked about competence, we talked about communication, candor. You know, can you be candid with people? You've got to. If we go back to your grade book, all of us as human beings, what do we expect from our leaders? We don't expect our leaders to be perfect. We know that's not possible. We expect them to be humble. We expect them to be honest. We expect them to be candid with us. We expect them to learn from their mistakes and have the courage to go, you know, I made a mistake. Have a courage once they know they made a mistake to change it, to admit it, to improve, to share it. But we expect people to tell us the truth. And so do you have the courage to tell somebody something they don't want to hear? Do you have the courage to make a decision? And sometimes people will say to me, gee, I don't know what the right thing to do is. Well, I don't think that's an honest response. I'm convinced that our parents taught us right from wrong, that we know right from wrong. The real question is, are you willing to accept the consequences of an unpopular decision? Are you willing to have people dislike your decision? One of the hardest things is going to be to enforce the standards and correct misbehavior and punish people that you personally like. But you've got to do that. One of the difficult things to do is to fire somebody. And you've got to do that. If after allowing them the opportunity to improve and change the behavior, which is detrimental to the team's success, at some point in time, you've got to go, yeah, I've tried to work with you. You know, this match isn't going to work. I'm going to let you go, and still do it in a private, respectful fashion. I mean, how many people have you had to fire and then you went, you know, what are your plans? What's your plan B? How can I assist you in your transition? Who can I talk to? Because realizing that you've changed their lives, that you may have dramatically decreased their ability to care for their family, but you will lose the respect and the trust of your organization if you allow people to remain in your organization who clearly are not performing properly, who clearly are not contributing to the success, who clearly are violating the rules and the norms that you have established. You got to be honest with people. You've got to hold yourself accountable for honesty. Courage is my fifth C, and I've tried to weave courage in with all of this. You know, in the military, why we probably dwell on the demonstration of physical courage on a battlefield. You know, I've got two very close friends of mine who were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And to me, I'm irritated. I'm adverse to the terminology of veterans being heroes. And as I shared with you, I've got years in very difficult combat environments, and I don't have any action I've ever taken on the battlefield that I view as heroic. I don't know any soldier that would go, I'm a hero. We view our families as our heroes. Our families whose unconditional love and support allow us to serve in uniform. Our families who have to act as both mother and father. Our children. I mean, if you've ever had to do I've looked a young son of mine in the eyes and gone, I don't know when I'm coming home or if I'm coming home. Take care of your mother. I looked at my young daughter and said, I'm going to be in Afghanistan for 2 years, sweetie. I'm going to miss your confirmation. I'm going to miss your birthdays. I'm going to miss Christmas. Please do what your mama asks. The courage of our families to carry on, never knowing in reality if we're coming home and if we are injured or killed in combat. And when we come home, we've changed. So do you have the courage as a leader to make hard decisions, to learn by listening, to make change, to not be paralyzed with the uncertainty of the environment? Now, I'm convinced that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the conquest of fear. We all face uncertain, ambiguous, complex environments. And what you do, your role in maintaining the standard of properly cleaned medical instruments that are used to save lives and adjust injuries. If you don't pay attention to detail, if you aren't candid and courageous to go, gee, this is wrong, we're not holding the standard, people will suffer because of that. Your responsibility to the medical community is profound. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so honored to make a contribution to you and your program, because of what your contribution is to the health of our veterans, to the health of people in need. I mean, that's with the uncertainty we face right now. You should be thankful for the gift of every day. You should challenge yourself. You should commit yourself every day to try and be a better human being and seek out opportunities to serve others and to provide support to those in need. You should get a great deal of satisfaction over successful team efforts based upon how they impact the safety and health of our communities, of our nation. And the last C is commitment. You know, how do you show people you're committed? You're there. You're there physically, if you can be. You're there virtually. You don't even have to necessarily do anything, but when things go wrong, the leader is present. When things go wrong, the leader goes, I'm responsible, I'm accountable for everything my organization does. I will send the praise and the credit and the congratulations to my team, but the errors we will learn from, and I will assess and I will assume accountability. Leaders are accountable, they're responsible. They do due diligence. You know, my 2 years in Afghanistan, President Karzai at times would accuse me of violating the laws of Afghanistan and threaten to jail me or throw me out of country. And a couple of times I had to remind him that I didn't work for him. But I got to the point where I carried around the Constitution of Afghanistan. And when I was getting threatened or chastised or corrected, I'd go, Your Excellency, would you please help me understand what article in your Constitution I'm violating? And I'd pull out this book. And so leaders who are committed do their due diligence. And in your profession, you probably got all sorts of people and organizations sending regulations and stipulations and limitations to you. A committed leader will do their homework. They will understand the rules rules and regulations and stipulations and treaties and agreements, which constantly seem to be changing, but do not allow yourself to have somebody go, you're doing this wrong, and it impacts the safety of others, without going, I want to do the right thing. So would you please share with me the document, the memo, the regulation, the rule that I missed? And then be committed and courageous enough to change and to lead change, because you're focused on the betterment of the team. So my 6 C's that we've gone over, that I think have applicability to any circumstance in any team. We talked about commonality, we talked about competence, we talked about communication, we talked about candor, we talked about courage, and we talked about commitment. And I will now await with great anticipation your interrogation. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. General Huber, thank you so much for leading us today and for sharing your insights as we all look at ways in which we can lead and improve upon our leadership skills. Those 6 C's, commonality, competence, communication, candor, courage, and commitment, all are directly tied to our ability to be resilient. And so for that, I thank you for sharing. I would like to open it up for questions. I know we are at time, but there are a couple of questions that did come through that I certainly want to get to. If you're able to stick around for the question and answer session, wonderful. In about an hour, you will receive an email with a link to the CE survey and certificate. You can also click on the icon on the bottom of your screen right now. But General Huber, one of the questions that did come through, first and foremost, many people wrote in saying, thank you so much for your service. Another comment said, one of the most profound takeaways for me as a leader is that I serve those who follow me. Those who follow don't serve me. So thank you for that. When you were talking about courage, and more specifically about exposing yourself as a human, having the courage to share your true self with others, it sounds like that really struck a chord for a lot of our audience members. In your opinion, do you feel that it's best for leaders? Do you feel that the best leader is one who is vulnerable, or ones who have the mentality of, strap on your bootstraps a little bit tighter and keep going for the sake of those that they're leading?
I believe in the concept of situational leadership. And I don't mean by that you change the core of your character. But I have knelt in the dust and the dirt and the sand and the blood, holding hands with SEALs and Green Berets as we paid our respects and we mourned the loss of one of our teammates. And I've never had anybody accuse us of being vulnerable because we shed a tear. So I'm not a guy who feels that men don't cry. And I never had any difficulty then standing back up with those warriors and going, okay, we got to go back at it. And the challenge that you face when you bear the guilt and the responsibility of someone killed in action, and then you got to go do it again. So I think and there's times when your commitment, so you as the leader, you're there when things turn really ugly and people look to you and go, oh my God, what do we do now? I mean, there's a time for you to be stoic, to present that calm appearance. And I don't see those as controversies. So I've never had anybody accuse me of being fearful of demonstrating my emotions, and I didn't see that impact my ability to lead in extremely adverse circumstances. So I think you show your humanity, but that doesn't mean that when things get ugly and get bad, you're going, oh my God, what do I do? The sky is falling. And if you just reflect upon people that you're willing to follow, that you allow the privilege to lead you, what do you expect out of them? And I think that normally, if you're honest with yourself, you go, hey, I expect people to shed a tear and then wipe the tear away and then go, okay, we got to get back to work.
Thank you for that. This next question says, what qualities are lacking most among today's leaders, and what qualities are the most effective?
From my foxhole, I think there's a lot of leaders at senior levels who are focused on their own self-promotion and their own next success or selling their next book. I mean, it amazes me. First of all, your unsolicited question, senior military leaders have got to be apolitical. All the military leaders, the retired generals and admirals that you see writing op-eds and on the TV, I know them all. I've served with them all. Some of them are my friends. But in my opinion, every one of them are absolutely incorrect. And the United Code of Military Justice, Unified Code of Military Justice, has an article specifically in there which makes it a crime to speak disparagingly about our elected officials. And it's got, whether you're retired or active duty, you can be brought back and charged for doing that. And it tears at the fiber of trust between civilian control of the military. When if you as a military leader want to run for office, okay, that's different. But if you want to critique others, that's inappropriate. So, and typically when I see them come on the TV, they're selling a book. And so that angers me, because I don't want civilian leaders to question the ability of the military to serve, to protect and defend the Constitution, that they become political and biased in a nature when providing military advice. But it really gets to the essence of the question is leaders have got to be selfless. Leaders have got to comprehend that they serve others, and they got to be humble. And this isn't about, if you have the privilege. I mean, you can imagine in my 38 years, I literally had the privilege to serve hundreds of thousands of men and women. And they humble me. They reach back to me, people that I haven't seen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And they go, we served together. I saw you in a blog. I saw you in a YouTube. I just wanted to say thank you. I did this because you gave me the opportunity. I mean, they have no reason to do that, and it's such a humbling mechanism. So for leaders who are about to say something or do something, you should really step back and go, okay, am I doing this for my own self-gratification, or am I doing this to improve the performance of my team, and therefore my team will gain greater rewards and be able to care for their family? And I see a lot of leaders that, because of their age and their seniority, they don't do their homework. And they think that because I was a successful leader in the military or at Nissan or Bridgestone or NBC, why I don't need to learn and adjust and change the way I do things to make a contribution in my new role.
Okay. Wonderful. And there's one more question for you as we wrap up. What's the one thing that you'd recommend healthcare professionals do to continue to grow and develop as a leader?
Boy, I tell you, the amount of respect and appreciation that I have for healthcare professionals, not only in their ever-present role as first responders and caregivers, and you want to talk about the strength of character of humanity. I guess what I'd ask is something that's counter-cultural for them, and that is, for goodness sakes, please pay attention to their own safety. And as people start talking about the availability of a vaccine and then the difficulty of the distribution of it, my advice to those who ask me is it's got to go to our heroes, our first responders, those angels. I mean, when Shelley's mom was going through hospice care, I just looked at that and said, wow, we couldn't have done this without hospice, without the medical professionals. I would just ask you, the leaders of the medical care providers, to find some way to care for the most precious resource in any organization, the human being, and these men and women who have committed themselves to be in difficult, dangerous, threatening environment to care for others.
Okay, General Huber, again, thank you so much for sharing your insights on leadership and how everyone tuned in can take a moment to self-reflect on the things that we can do to build our leadership skills and serve those who follow us. For everyone still tuned in, if you're still looking for additional CE credits to finish up your learning this year, along with these Censis True Grit webinars, you can now earn free CE credits on the True Grit app. So I actually find myself on the app often to tune into the discussions that are taking place there, many of which are actually about the topic of leadership. So if you haven't already downloaded the Censis True Grit app, do so. You can do so via the link that's in the resources list on your screen. As I mentioned before, in about an hour, you'll receive an email that will have a link to this session on demand, along with a link to access the session survey and download your CE certificate. Since this session will be available on demand, I encourage you to share it with those around you, with your colleagues, with your department leaders, anyone who can glean some very important information from this session. You can also click on the CE icon at the bottom of the screen to access your session survey directly. On behalf of myself and Beyond Clean, and in partnership with Censis Technologies, we thank you so much for spending your morning with us today. And as always, we encourage you to keep fighting dirty. We'll see you next time.